Let's talk a little bit about the JVQuery, that which I had to write to support this. Like I said, this is the main HTML page that comes up when you start up, and then everything else is dynamic. And the dynamic aspect of it is managed by some JavaScript that goes along with it, so it's called main.js. And main.js, this is it. Basically, what happens is it fires this thing up whenever it finds new data on Vera. And how I set that up is at the very beginning. This $V stands for the Vera data. It says when Vera has any new data, run the Vera main fill panel. And the new data here is when Vera detects that the configuration has changed. There's a way to find out that it's not that a switch was turned on or off, but that a major configuration change has happened. When I detect it, I rebuild the display. I call this fill panel function, and here's the fill panel function. Let's not go through all of this. For those of you that are familiar with web-based design, so this should look very familiar. Here, AR, in the AR variable, I'm selecting all the rooms, and then later I'm going to iterate over all the rooms. And then here I do a selection that says, find me all of the devices out of the $V, where the room is equal to, and it's the room ID for the current room that I'm iterating on. Iterate it. The D variable contains the instance of the particular data that I'm iterating through. So the D stands for the data for the current select device. And then what I do is I come down in here and I do a new, T actually is a dynamic way of saying which widget to display, whether it's a dimmable switch or a lock, and I pass it the data. Once I get that, I create an object. I ask for the static HTML for it. I append it to the latest created room widget, and the room widgets are these things right here, the little tabs that contain them. And then I initialize it. And similarly, I do that for scenes. I walk through all the scenes looking for a scene that's in that room, and if so, I add it. And this is the whole page. This handles filling panels based on what scope it is, whether the scope is active, or the scope is a particular room number, or the scope is all. That's what some of the logic I skipped over, or dashboard, is just the selection logic about which devices to create instances for. And then the rest of this code down in here is dealing with the background panel, where the properties. So this is all generic, so this is not device specific. Then if you wanted to take a look at what the code looks like for a particular widget, here's is for the dimmable lights. Get HTML, I told you the first thing I do is I create a dimmable light and I pass it in its data. So I save its data. Then I get the HTML. This is the static HTML DOM model equivalent of what a widget looks like when it's a display widget. And let me pull one up over here real quickly. AV closet. So let's go to Great Room, since we're doing a dimmable light. So we're building one of these kind of devices, okay? And so you'll see that it specifies what the icons are. It creates a slider with options for on/off, and then it creates a slider for the values between 0 and 100. Then after it gets the HTML, then it does some initialization. It ties events to those things that are on the user interface. particular when the slider changes or when the state change. It goes in there. The patent function is what gets fired. The init function also says when any of the data changes for the data. Now this is Vera data. So if the Vera data changes, call my paint function, and the paint function will redisplay this user interface. And what the paint function does here is it gets the current values for things like the dimmers, the load level status, and then it sets, the slider values. It sets the opacity for the image, and based on the current data. So it resets these things every time any data changes. It goes and resets everything. And then these are the functions that actually call actions when you actually click a button. For example, when you change the state from on to off, it calls the this should look very familiar for you LUA programmers. Calling an action with that service, that target, and these values. And that's it. So for this prototype, how much code did I have to write? This is it. This is line numbers. This is character or word counts, and this is total characters. So I've written 1,200 lines code, roughly 40 kilobytes worth of data to provide this interface. That does not include the jQuery and the jQuery mobile libraries. Altogether, du-s dot, we're 1 megabyte worth of data. That includes the images, the jQuery libraries. So that's the extent of the size of the prototype so far.